webinar. We wanted to be able to give growers the opportunity to specifically ask questions directly with our experts. So hence the kind of open meeting approach rather than webinar. And I'd like to introduce you all to Kevin Shakespeare, who'll be taking a lead on today's webinar, which is our second in this series of imports and exports. Before I hand over, we'll just go through these housekeeping rules. But also, could we welcome Kath Peasley from Welsh Government Plant Health Department, who's joined us. And Kath has agreed to take specific questions away if that's useful. So with this closed meeting, you're not automatically muted. So if you could mute yourself, but then when Kevin has delivered a section and pauses, do feel free to unmute yourself and ask the questions yourself if you want to. Your other option, if you'd rather not ask the question yourself, is to submit it into the chat box. We will be recording the session and we'll post that on the Knowledge Hub afterwards. If you don't wish to be recorded for your part of it, then please do say, and we can pause the recording at that point. And if you accidentally leave, then you can rejoin using the same link. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you, Kevin.
Thank you very much indeed, and it's a pleasure to meet everyone today. I'm not sure if I've met any of you before, but it's a pleasure. Shall I share my screen? Let's see if we can get the correct one up here. So hopefully that's it. Imports, no, it's the wrong one. I've called the wrong one up. So I think we're doing exports today, not imports. So just let me stop sharing my screen. Let's see if I can get the right one up this time. So let's.
I've got it, Kevin, if you need.
Yeah, now I'm just calling, I should be okay now, so apologies for that. Just called up the wrong document. So here we are, exports. So hopefully you can all see my screen now. Great. Okay, so let's, so what we're going to do today is talk about the post-transition impacts very much from an export perspective. And we covered imports last week. Yes, you can argue it's the reverse, but I think one way we need to look at this is that a lot of the deferred procedure simplifications, as we refer to them with regard to the United Kingdom or Great Britain in particular, do not apply to trade with the European Union. So in very much from day one, the 1st of January, the things like full border controls, regulatory product compliance commences from the 1st of January. So we need to bear that in mind. That any reference to simplifications or border operating models but is for goods coming into Great Britain, not for goods entering the European Union. A very quick point around the Institute of Export and International Trade is we are a membership training organisation and also provide professional qualifications. But in particular, I just wanted to mention the HMRC grant funding. So HMRC initially announced £34 million of grant funding, which was completely used up, but a further 50 million announced around about June, July time. Of that 50 million, we're probably around about 40 million has now been used up. So in the run rate, we're probably going to use it all up by the end of December. And this is for understanding around customs grants, how customs procedures work, which, as we're going to look at today, is not just about the customs declaration. There's a lot more to it than that. So we would encourage all businesses, if you haven't done so, to actually register for the grant scheme and use the opportunity, for example, to train your employees, train yourself around the procedures. And also to mention, we talk, a lot of people talk around freight forwarders, hauliers will do it all for me. Well, they can do, but you are ultimately responsible in the eyes of customs and the eyes of the law for customs declarations and everything that comes with it, not the freight forwarder or the haulier. So what we're going to look at today is tariffs for trade with the EU, the trade and customs journey, The requirements for customs declaration, we're going to refer to Inco terms and the importance of them, VAT and Northern Ireland, and then further considerations. So if we consider first of all tariffs, there's so much talk at the moment around will there be a trade deal or won't there be a trade deal? And that is important in the context of tariffs. But in terms of customs procedures and product and regulatory compliance, that is highly likely to change and will change from the 1st of January. The focus on the trade deal is around tariffs, not around customs, and any product and regulatory compliance is in theory possible, but could come later or may not come at all. So businesses have to prepare for change, and note that the discussions on trade deals or free trade agreements is specific to tariffs. Now, if a free trade agreement is signed between the UK and the European Union, then goods entering the EU are likely to enter free of tariffs and duties. If no trade deal is signed, then duties and tariffs will apply, and we'll look at examples of what they are on the next slide. So when we refer to the Australia type agreement that's been referred to, arrangement, there is no trade deal, free trade agreement between Australia and the European Union. That's all that is essentially. So goods moving from Great Britain, and I've excluded Northern Ireland from that, and I will talk more about Northern Ireland later, will be subject to import duties when they enter the European Union if there is no trade deal, free trade agreement between the UK and the EU. So just some examples in terms of, we talk about the EU tariff, which is also referred to as the common external tariff. And this is tariff that any imports coming in from countries where there is no trade agreement with the EU, these tariffs apply. And as we can see, in some cases, these tariffs are seasonal in terms of the actual level of the tariff. In some cases, they are a fixed tariff. But clearly, tariffs of 8.3%, 6.5% are difficult. And if there is no trade deal, somebody will have to pay that import tariff, depending on the Inco terms chosen, which we will look at. Now, further examples of tariffs are detailed there for further products and there. Now, if you're not sure of what tariff applies to your product, you can go in terms of the EU. There is a site called Europa EU, which you can key in the commodity code and check the tariff applicable. Now, the commodity code becomes very, very important. So if we go back a few slides here, is that it's very essential that you quote the correct commodity code on your customs declaration. And the forwarder or the broker making the declaration on your behalf, if it's them, will make it clear that the commodity code is your liability, it's not theirs. So you have to get the correct commodity code. And in some cases, the commodity codes will be similar at 8.3% tariffs for these four commodity codes on screen, 6.5%. But if you get the wrong commodity code, then upon customs audit, you could be subject to fines and penalties. And clearly, if the wrong tariff has been paid, then clearly it could become more severe. So understanding what your commodity code is becomes very, very important. And happy to take questions on that shortly. So I'm going to just do a couple of slides on the trade and customs journey, and then before we go into more detail, open it up for questions. So just to confirm, from the 1st of January, the UK, or Great Britain in particular, leaves the customs territory of the European Union. There becomes two customs territories, one in GB/UK and one in the EU. And when goods move between customs territories, there is a requirement for an outbound declaration, customs declaration. So in this case, leaving Great Britain, and an inbound declaration for goods entering the European Union. And somebody, so either the buyer or the seller, has to make those declarations. And Inco terms determine whether who it is, and we're going to look specifically at that because that becomes absolutely key and fundamental. But it's not just about the customs declaration, as we're going to look at shortly. But liability for the declaration is with the trader. the buyer or the seller, the importer or the exporter. So let's look at an example transaction first of all, and I'm going to focus, then open this up for a question. We're going to look at imports into the EU in a minute, but let's look at the export side first of all. So you can see here there's different stages: goods available, exporters premises, goods loaded onto a lorry. And these are stages in the process which are determined by the Inco terms used. Lorry from exporters premises to port of dispatch, and then goods required to clear customs at port of dispatch. But customs declaration is required in advance. So what is going to be different from the 1st of January? There will be requirement for an export customs declaration. That will either be the seller or the buyer that makes that. Now, when we look at Inco terms shortly, you may be familiar, there are 11 Inco terms, international commercial terms. The buyer would only be responsible for the outbound declaration under one of those Inco terms. In the other 10 Inco terms, it's you, the GB supplier, who will be responsible for that declaration. You may require a phytosanitary certificate. So suddenly this is not just about the customs declaration. And how will the authorities know that a phytosanitary certificate is required? They will know from the commodity code that is keyed into the declaration. There may be requirements on labelling, analysis and goods placed on the market. If there is a trade deal between the UK and the European Union, there will require to be a certificate of origin, evidencing those goods the economic nationality of UK origin. And we'll touch on the importance of that later. That's if there's a trade deal. If you are a temporary export, so goods bought for an exhibition, you will require an ATA carnet. In addition to the customs declaration, there's a requirement for what we call a safety and security declaration. It doesn't happen at the moment because we're in the transition period, but it will. So the goods being carried are safe and secure, and they're not creating harm to people, animals, and the environment. That safety and security declaration is required as well, invariably provided by the haulier, but you need to make sure the haulier will be providing that on your behalf. And the wooden packaging must be ISPM 15 compliant. So it must be specially heat treated, and it must have the ISPM 15 kite mark. I think we've got a slide later on. If it doesn't have that kite mark, it is not compliant, and it will not be allowed into the European Union. ISPM 15 heat treated was a United Nations regulation to avoid the spread of beetles, pests, and other animals through special heat treatment. Now, I'm going to talk in a minute about imports into the EU. We talked about exports from Wales to the EU. Are there any questions on either tariffs or the first part of this slide on customs declarations that anybody has? No? Okay, I'll continue. Now, imports...
Hello, hang on. Whoa.
Sorry.
Just go back a slide, please.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's Gary Swain here, Forecross Nursery. Yeah, I take your point about the wood packaging material, but reading on the Gov website, it says they see it as no extra perceived risk and going to consider it, at least initially, as okay. Is that your understanding, or what's the score with it?
I guess you could argue it depends in which way you look at it. For the purposes of today, these are exports to the European Union. So it'll be up to the EU to decide whether it accepts it. So I think, as we've seen with other experts, that the EU have more a zero tolerance than the UK, who maybe have, if you like, control their own borders. I would suspect that the EU, if they wanted to reject it, could reject it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
But no, thanks for the question. Okay. So imports into the EU, again, there's remarkably similar things here, but a few differences. If there is no trade deal, there will be possible import tariffs. So those tariffs will be on the goods entering the European Union. And those tariffs will be payable upon importation. Again, the Inco terms determine who is responsible. So if you are the exporter, as we're going to look at, there's only one Inco term in which you are responsible for the import declaration overseas. But by using that Inco term, as we're going to look at, DDP, delivered duty paid, you are also responsible for import tariffs and VAT as well. So we're going to look at the significance of that and the importance. There is a requirement for the import customs declaration. Goods may be subject to SBS checks through border control posts. There is compliance requirements on labelling, origin of goods placed on the market, and import VAT is payable upon importation. Now, I have a slide shortly on import VAT because it's becoming a big issue for GB exporters. There is a requirement for an entry safety and security declaration, which is different from an exit. So an exit from GB and an entry safety and security declaration into the European Union. And the European Union clearly also includes Southern Ireland as well. Now, you need again to make sure that the hauliers are ready to make these safety and security declarations, because there is obviously a lot of pressure on hauliers to make sure they are in that position. And again, the wooden packaging element that we've just referred to. So I've got a few slides here, but I'm probably going to some extent pass over to sort of Kath, not to read the slides, but in terms of questions, but probably just to say a few ways of just considering this. So from the 1st of January, exports to the EU become same or very similar to exports to the rest of the world. So those of you familiar with exporting to the rest of the world will be more familiar with the processes. So, and this concept of a third country. The UK is a third country outside of the European Union. In this case, Great Britain, probably. So from 1st of January, all regulated plants and plant products exported from England, Scotland or Wales to the EU will be subject to EU third country import controls. And there are a number of import controls. Now, I'm very happy to refer back to these slides or refer to Kath, and we can definitely take questions on these both now. What I'm going to do is just make these slides available. Clearly, this is taken from gov.uk, but we're very happy to take specific questions on these. So if you like, the requirement obviously for a phytosanitary certificate and the need to contact the plant health authorities. I'm going to open this up to questions. There's continued use of the EDMERO system that needs to be used. And there are exempt plants and products that need to be considered. Now, what I'm going to do, I just want to, I'm going to just check if there's any further questions. Before I go on to VAT and Inco terms, I just want to check, are there any further questions, bearing in mind, I guess, around the third country regulations that anybody wanted to ask?
Yes. Some wood and wood products. A lot of compost has bark in it these days. So what's going to be the view of the EU? Do you know the view of the EU on that or not?
Yeah, so again, I'll probably pass to Kath to some extent, but in terms of requirements, I believe that comes under the Forestry Commission. There is an element, if you like, of what's on the ground, the EU, but EU regulation states that EU import controls must be adopted there. So whereas the UK is maybe in theory taking a more lenient view towards import controls, the EU is not. I don't know, Sarah, Kath, if you or anyone wants to add to that.
Yeah, sorry, Gary, did you say as a growing medium were you talking about?
Yeah, the compost.
Yeah.
They obviously started reducing peat in compost. A lot of it's got wood fibre in it and bark in it now. So effectively, you're exporting wood and wood products to the EU.
Yeah,
so
sorry, go on.
It's going to be a difficult situation. You know, how are you going to export if your compost has got wood fibre in it?
Yeah. I think I'm going to bring Neil in at that point, if he doesn't mind, to comment on where they've got to.
Yeah, thanks. We've come across this already. And what we believe is we'll have to make an additional declaration on the export or the permit. And we'll need certification from our compost suppliers to prove any wood products like bark or wood fibre has been heat treated as part of the process. So we need a certificate from the manufacturer there.
Okay, well, thank you, Neil.
No, thanks.
Yeah.
Kath, did you want to add anything else, or is that one?
Well, I can certainly take the question away as well. Out of interest, what sort of amounts are you exporting or were sending to Europe, and where? What's the scale?
Well, we export into Southern Ireland and I don't know, Arctic full a week when we're busy, something like that.
Okay.
So you're talking, I don't know, 15,000 pots for, particularly in the busy period, in April, May, June. So it's quite a significant amount, really. And
you're sending it as compost, not that you're selling plants for plants that are in compost.
No, we're selling plants that are in compost.
Plants that are in
compost has wood and wood products within it.
Okay.
Which Neil's just said, you'll have to get a declaration from the compost producer.
Okay.
To say it's all okay.
Okay. Well, I'll take it away as well. Certainly, it does sound, like that as Neil has been through it. Was that with was that with the APHA?
Yes, and also it got brought to our attention by the Irish authorities as well. About imports there. So one of our Irish customers actually bought it up for us.
Okay. Well, because it's all about what we've done to mitigate taking pests and diseases with whatever we're taking. So I was interested to find out what was going to happen with this, and I will ask again, but certainly with the phytosanitary certificates, it's saying you don't have pests and diseases in your growing medium. So your growing medium has to either, in layperson's terms, for me, which is what I am, it has to your growing medium has to be not there, or it has to be clean, which certainly then the heat treatment would is then the way that you're cleaning the wood, isn't it? So but I'll see if I'll also be taking this back, because it's also that awareness of how much is being shipped around is something that is interesting for us. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Kath. Kevin, back to you, I think.
Right, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you for the questions. They really are very good questions. So when we talked about Inco terms, international commercial terms, determine a responsibility for the trade journey, who is arranging and paying for the freight, responsibility for declarations, which we've talked about and we'll talk about more, who is responsible for loading and unloading of the goods. Sometimes some Inco terms cover insurance, but also import tariffs and VAT. So suddenly the Inco term agreed becomes essential and important. There are 11 Inco terms, as I referred to, but the reality is for GB to EU trade, there's 4 main Inco terms used, not the only Inco terms, there are others, but the reality is it tends to be these 4 Inco terms. Now, if your EU buyer is responsible for collecting the goods at your premises, then they could be either using Ex-Works or FCA. Ex-Works is where they have responsibility for the loading of the goods, but just as importantly, they have responsibility for the customs declarations. And if they are making those declarations, they will require a UK VAT number and a UK EORI number. And let's just talk about this EORI number, because obviously a lot's been said about it. Currently, there is one EORI number, which can be used UK-wide during the transition period. From the 1st of January, there will be 2 or even 3 EORI numbers. There will be your EU-wide EORI number if you are in the EU, including Southern Ireland. There will be your GB EORI number if you're based in Great Britain, and if you're based in Northern Ireland, it will be an XI EORI number. And trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland will have to be traded on the XI EORI number. And I'll speak more about Northern Ireland in a few slides' time. So is it ex-works or is it FCA free carrier? If it's FCA free carrier, then effectively the declaration is the responsibility of the GB exporter. So we can see a distinct difference between ex-works and GB, and FCA. And I'll take questions on this in a moment because it's so important. If you are responsible for arranging the haulage, and the lorry is delivering to the premises of the European buyer, it could be two Inco terms. It could be delivered duty paid or DAP delivered at place. And there is key essential differences between the two. And we do appreciate in some cases that buyers and sellers might not be sure which Inco term it's used, because we've never really had to think about EU trade in Inco terms before, not to this level of detail. If it is delivered duty paid, DDP is a maximum responsibility for the GB exporter. So the GB exporter will require an EU EORI number and an EU VAT number. And again, I'll focus on the importance of that shortly. And the GB exporter is responsible for any import duties and import VAT. So a lot of responsibility there, and cash flow, working capital impacts. If it's DAP delivered at place, the EU buyer is responsible for the declaration in the EU. So they then become responsible for the import duties, the import VAT, as well as the declaration. Now, I'm going to talk shortly about France. In fact, if I got the VAT, I'm going to cover VAT and open it up to questions because it's important to do this. This is not just about VAT. So VAT on exports to the EU. The differences with in the UK, we have postponed import VAT accounting. Only a few EU countries have postponed VAT accounting, the Netherlands and Belgium. And Belgium, you have to register there. So VAT in the EU is generally payable upon importation. So when the goods are imported, VAT has to be paid. The only ways that is avoided, if we call it that, or deferred, is if the member state applies postponed VAT accounting, a VAT deferment account established, which will be require a bank guarantee with the customs authorities in the EU. And in some countries that requires fiscal representation, such as France, Spain, Italy, and Portugal, as well as Central Europe and the Baltic states. Or the freight forwarder or customs agent is prepared to use their VAT deferment account, obviously for a fee. But again, some might do that, but it is difficult for freight forwarders if they're doing it on behalf of every trader. So we can see here the importance of VAT, and if DAP is used, that becomes an issue. Now, let's see if I've got the next slide. Yeah. So we're hearing a lot of stories around France, around the fact that France is refusing to give out VAT numbers to UK exporters selling on DDP. They still need you still need an EU EORI number, and they want the import VAT payable immediately upon importation. Whereas if it's the Netherlands, for example, it can be deferred. So very conscious that France could be an issue for some companies in terms of cash flow and having to pay the VAT. But if we go back again to the Inco terms determine who is responsible for the declaration, the import duties and the import VAT. They become key. Equally, we're aware that European buyers may take the view that I just want to receive the goods as I am today. You're the supplier. I want you to take maximum responsibility to sell me the goods which I will pay for. Are there any questions on VAT, customs declarations or duties that anyone would like to ask? Okay. Well, I'll move on, but happy to take questions because it's a key area and one of the areas we get asked the most. So customs declarations is not just about the declaration. It's not just about the freight forwarder or broker making it on your behalf. You are responsible to customs. And if you're making a declaration overseas, you are responsible to French customs, Dutch customs as well. You need to select the correct commodity code as we've talked about. I'll come on to customs procedures code shortly. You need to declare the correct valuation of goods and correct consignee, so the person receiving the goods. Now, the correct valuation, goods are valued for international trade purposes, for customs purposes. And although it's clearly not the case between the EU and Great Britain, there are some parts of the world where goods are deliberately undervalued to pay less duty and less VAT. That is illegal, and customs authorities do carry out valuation checkers to make sure that deliberate process of undervaluation is not taking place. I'm not saying it's taking place in any respect between Great Britain and the EU. You are the declarant of records, so responsible for the documentation to customs. The VAT we've talked about, any licenses and certification, it also depends as well. So we can suddenly see that the customs declaration takes a lot more, rather than just paperwork, it has so much more implications and rules that have to be met. Commercial invoice becomes absolutely key as evidence of a trade transaction, and frequently if an agent or freight forwarder makes a declaration on your behalf, they will require you to send the commercial invoice, possibly a packing list to them as well. Now, I'm going to mention this, and I'm not sure if this is relevant or not to some of you, is that if there is no trade deal between the UK and the EU, we are seeing increases in use of what we call customs special procedures. So an example would be, and it might only apply for certain types of products in this sector, is if you bring goods into a customs warehouse, which has to be specially approved by customs, then you can hold the goods and you not pay duty or VAT until the goods are leave the warehouse. If the goods leave the warehouse into free circulation in Great Britain, you pay the import duty and VAT at the time. If you re-export them, so for example, you bring them in from Portugal or Spain to Great Britain and you re-export them to Southern Ireland, then there are no, then import duties and import VAT are not payable. You remove the requirement for import duty and import VAT. Similarly, with inward process, if you are taking in component parts or ingredients, as the case may be, and turning them into a finished product, then you don't pay duty on those imported goods until they're released to free circulation. If they are re-exported, you do not pay any import duty and import VAT. So you can apply that to goods coming from the EU to Great Britain, back to the EU. You could apply it for goods coming in from China, from Thailand, and then you are exporting them to the European Union. So there's a number of scenarios that can be applied. Now, from the 1st of January next year, if you use these customs procedures, you need to be authorised. There is an authorisation process. Then financial guarantees are only required in the UK for high-risk traders. So traders with a history of non-compliance and poor record keeping or financial solvency. Otherwise, financial guarantees are not required. And financial guarantees, bank guarantees, have been one of the main barriers to use of these customs special procedures. So with the fact that if there is no trade deal, we could see an increase in use of these customs special procedures. But even if you are bringing goods in from China, Thailand, countries like that that have import duties, you can still use customs special procedures. Now, Northern Ireland, again, very happy to open this up to questions with regard to Northern Ireland. So with regard to Northern Ireland is still part of the SPS zone of the European Union. So under the Northern Ireland Protocol, goods entering Northern Ireland will require import declarations and will require an entry safety and security declaration and will be subject to regulatory EU regulatory compliance. There will not be any export declaration, so there doesn't need to be an export declaration leaving Great Britain or an exit safety and security. But there will be required to be inbound declarations and inbound safety and security. Now, if the goods are deemed to be at risk of moving to Northern Ireland, to the Republic of Ireland, Southern Ireland, and the territory and the EU, then tariffs may be applicable. We're hoping to hear around the at-risk process very shortly. It might not be at goods level; it might be around the nature of the actual movement. So the UK government position is that if the trader says the goods are staying in Northern Ireland, they have evidence to that effect, then they will not deem to be at risk. But they will be subject to audit, and clearly, if anyone can't provide the evidence, they'll be subject to fines and penalties, etc. But that's the UK position. But the EU have yet to announce their position on the definition of that risk. And if a trader says, "I've got evidence to stay in Northern Ireland," is that sufficient? So clearly, it also depends on whether there's a trade deal. Goods entering Northern Ireland will require phytosanitary certificates and will be subject to SPS checks. It is possible to move goods from Holyhead to Dublin to Northern Ireland, or from Fishguard to Rosslare to Northern Ireland, and they should move under a transit procedure. Now, a trader support service has been set up to support transit routes and the making of the declarations. So the government has established a free-to-use trader support service that will make declarations on behalf of traders. Now, I could spend all day talking about this because the Institute of Export are part of the consortium delivering the trader support service with the likes of Fujitsu and McKinsey's. But the important thing to bear in mind here is that if you do move goods between GB to NI, is that you register for the trader support service. You will be auto-enrolled for an XIE ORI before the 14th of December. And you can then talk about how the operating model is going to work. And the operating model is predominantly based on the haulier providing information to the trader support service to enable the declarations to be made. I'm simplifying the process a lot, but that's the general principle. If anyone is using their own lorry to move the goods across, then happy to take questions on that, because additional requirements for hauliers for moving goods to Northern Ireland as well, which we would need to work through. So if you use a haulier, it's very important that your haulier signs up for the trader support service as well. So very important to sign up through the website. Now, NI to GB declarations required in a limited number of circumstances. We're still waiting for a full list of that limited. That does include goods subject to international conventions, which would be CITES for trading in endangered species. It would require goods moving under duty suspension, so say from one customs warehouse to another. Where there is still discussion with the EU is around controlled goods. So there is still ongoing discussion as to whether any high-risk plants could be determined as controlled goods that would require declarations. That is still subject to discussion between the UK and the EU. Products with chemicals is also under discussion. Clearly, military goods will require requirements. So it's still under discussion, but there may be a limited number of declarations required for NI to GB where they're subject to international rules and regulations. So we're doing fine for time. Any questions on coming back to Inco Terms, VAT, requirements for goods moving to Northern Ireland at all? No? Okay. One sort of thing I do want to mention with regard to movements to the EU is we're hearing a lot about movements through Dover, Calais and Eurotunnel. So normally when you make a customs declaration, the customs declaration is the first point of arrival in the European Union, which would be Calais under our example. A lot of freight forwarders are looking to try and move goods under a transit procedure, which moves, so if, for example, you're moving goods to Germany, which means that the declaration is not made until the point of arrival in Germany in this case, but the freight forwarder has to be approved to use transit. It requires a bank guarantee to cover liabilities. So if you are moving goods, what you probably want to avoid if you're moving goods on from France is for France to be the first point of declaration. So you need to check with your freight forwarder around moving goods under a transit procedure, because declarations in France, you'll have the import VAT, the import duty, and you may require fiscal representation as well. So it's moving the declaration to the approved point of arrival, which could be the warehouse or facilities of the freight forwarder. Okay. Now, further consideration. So again, we're fine for time and happy to spend some time on questions here. Information on plant passports, and again, very, very happy for Neil and Kath to take questions on this as well. Origin of goods. Let's spend some time on origin and see if it affects here. Now, origin of goods is the economic nationality of the goods. So if there is a trade deal between the UK and the EU, the trade deal will depend on what we call the rules of origin for each tariff line, each commodity. So that is likely to be around 50 to 60% of that product, based predominantly on the sales price, will need to be of UK origin. Again, happy to take questions on that if anyone feels that's not the case. So if, for example, and it might not be the case clearly in this sector, you're bringing goods in from China with a high level of Chinese content, you may not be able to classify those as UK origin, which means that there would be tariffs on goods entering the EU if there is no trade deal. If you are moving goods from the EU to Wales and then subsequently on to Southern Ireland, then you, in theory, wouldn't be able to include the EU origin into UK origin. But in the trade deal, if there is a trade deal, there will be agreed rules of accumulation, where you can include EU content into UK content. But if you equally are providing goods to the European Union, which are going on to the rest of the world, and under an EU trade deal, then your UK origin may not be applicable for EU origin. So if you are applying goods that are just being moved on to, say, Canada, Japan, Mexico, Morocco, for example, if you have a very high level of UK content and the EU buyer is not adding much to it, the EU buyer may not be able to meet the rules of origin in their onward sale. So happy to take questions there. Post and parcels, a lot of people talk about, well, what about post and parcels? These are just parcels. I don't need declarations. Unfortunately, you do need declarations. So in the context of GB-EU, EU trade becomes the same as the rest of the world, like moving goods from the United States to China, for example. Yes, your parcel operator, your DHL, UPS, DPD, Hermes, and others may bulk the declarations, but you still need evidence of the trade transaction. You still need to check that declaration made on your behalf, even for small parcels. There is some, if you like, low-value consignment relief in the EU, which generally means that no declarations are required below normally around about 135 or 22 euros. The EU is removing that low-value consignment relief because unfortunately there's been lots of fraud in people deliberately declaring below 22 euros to avoid having to make declarations and pay duties. And trade continuity agreements. I just want to cover this because this could be important. The EU has trade agreements with 74 countries, and the UK has been trying to sign trade continuity agreements. So on this slide, we can see the countries where trade continuity agreements have been signed. And the announcement recently was that Canada has just been signed. Japan, an additional trade deal, a new trade deal was signed with Japan. Each have different requirements on rules of origin, I must stress, and what the percentage and what counts as qualifying origin. So basically, trade in theory continues with these third countries as it does today. However, some trade continuity agreements are still being discussed and engagement ongoing. So we can see on the list the likes of Egypt, Mexico, Singapore, Turkey, and Turkey cannot be agreed until the EU is agreed. Turkey follows after the EU. So effectively that means if these trade agreements are not signed, and we can see the likes of Serbia, Bosnia, Algeria here, then tariffs will apply on goods entering those countries from the EU, from the UK on UK exports. Excuse me. So it's important for businesses to look at where they're trading and monitor this site if you have any profile of exports to these countries. Discussions are ongoing clearly with some of these countries. Point on pallet availability. So there you have the ISPM 15 certified mark. And final point I just want to raise, which is not necessarily the purpose today, which is GDPR data protection. So this is a big issue and an example of issues which are not coming to the fore because the focus is on the free trade agreement and zero tariffs. So it needs to be mutual recognition of GDPR standards. If there's not, I think it's on the next slide, if you hold personal data, so personal customer data, employee data, addresses and personal details for employees with an address in the EU, even if you've booked a hotel for business customers in Great Britain, you need to make sure that your data meets the requirements of the EU in terms of standard contractual clauses. And the Information Commissionaire's Office, which is a government organisation, ico.org.uk, provides details of what information or what the standard contractual clauses are and how you should develop them. Now, there could be a mutual recognition agreement with the EU. We've only got 1 month to go. Having said that, if there's not, all businesses need to make sure they check their standard contractual clauses. It only needs a dissatisfied customer or an employee to obviously raise concerns around data protection. Okay. So in terms of actions, communicate, agree your Inco terms, understand the countries of trade, who you're buying from, who you're selling to, ensure you're compliant with EU and UK regulations, make sure you engage, especially with your freight forwarders, in terms of arrangement. So start to draw up plans, and happy to take further questions on that. And plan and prepare for the future. Communicate with your customers, your suppliers, your stakeholders, such as your freight forwarder, government departments, organisations such as APFA, for example, and really start to plan and prepare. It is important to do that now because there is so much information out there, but bear in mind it's about what's important for your business. What do I do? What is the nature of what I do? Who are my customers? Who are my suppliers? What stakeholders, such as freight forwarders and hauliers, do I work with? So that's it for me in terms of the slides. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, if that's okay.
Do you want to cancel the whole order? All right.
Oops. Thank you, Kevin. That was informative. Before we draw it to a close, has anybody got any other questions or comments that they might want to share with other growers and with other grower businesses as to where?
And so it's your order number 1643KS.
Yeah, I was wondering actually, in addition to our customers' ERI numbers, is there any other information we need from them at all?
Okay then, thank you, bye.
Oh, sorry, so in terms of the customers, clearly having their EORI number is useful, so it shows that they are prepared and they've got an EORI number. You obviously need to agree the Inco terms with the customer. You probably do need to check the commodity code, so that initially the commodity codes are staying the same between the UK and the EU. However, during the course of 2021, they will change. at some stage in 2021. But probably worth agreeing the commodity code so you've got conformity of that as well. And probably depend on the Inco terms, making sure that you're satisfied if they have some responsibility, that you're A, happy with them doing that, but B, satisfied that they are in a position to do that. So the lorry proverbially turns up at your premises. And it could be if they're doing it today, they're doing it, but obviously they'll do it in the future.
Thank you.
Would you mind sharing with us, Neil, where you feel that you've got to in the last couple of weeks?
Basically, we focus first on our imports, actually, because we've got quite a lot coming in next year, which is unusual, actually, because most of our stuff comes from outside the EU usually. So most of that has been handled by our suppliers and by our transport company, which is Van der Haas. So they're working together. They've organised the freight forwarding agent as well, so we're working with Channel Ports and a Dutch customs company called Bongers. So most of that's been done for us. We just furnish them with our EORI number, a few of the small details. They do everything else for us. Of course, our VAT deferment number as well. Exports, we've had a bit of a delay in getting orders in from the EU, but they are starting to come in now. Also, we've been shipping a huge amount in the past few weeks. People trying to beat the deadline of January 1st as well. So basically, we're getting the orders in from the EU now, so just making sure we're geared up. And we'll be doing like a reverse all our transfers with Van der Haas. So they do a big level of service for us as well. So in terms of the paperwork, so we'll just be doing the peach declarations basically.
Great. Thank you, Neil. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else, any questions or comments?
I just wanted to ask Kevin or say about as people start exporting using the different Inco terms, then is there anything that you want to add to do with insurance and ownership of goods and that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good question. So it's important that goods are insured during transit. And generally the Inco terms, only 2 Inco terms actually have insurance embedded within them, CIF and CIP, which are used less frequently for EU trade. So it's important to understand who is responsibility for insurance of goods in transit. The assumption is if the buyer is collecting for your premises, the buyer is going to be responsible for it. You can't make that assumption, you need to check. The assumption is if you're responsible then for the lorry or the haulage going to the buyer's premises, that you are responsible. So again, you need to make it very clear in your terms and conditions who is responsible for insurance of goods in transit. In some cases, the freight forwarder may provide a service to insure the goods for you for a fee, or you can work for a customs broker, an insurance broker to get the goods insured yourself. But it's important that, and it's a really good question, not to assume that the other party's doing it, or because you could either both insure the goods or neither of you could insure the goods. So it's very, very clear that there is a need to make sure there's insurance for goods in transit. But no, it's a great point. Ownership is a really interesting one as well. So when does title pass to the from the buyer to seller? And I guess Inco terms is that in some cases people will say, well, it's very clear that title passes depending on the Inco terms. Well, personally, I'm not so clear on that point. It's clearly if you're using a haulier to move the goods yourself, in theory you are in control of those goods. If, however, you've sent the bill of lading, for example, to the overseas buyer, made out to their order, then technically your title could be passed. If money has been paid over, payment in advance. So it's very clear, I think, you need to agree when title is going to pass it. There's an assumption it goes with Inco terms, and there is an element of truth in that, but I think if something is more specific in the contract, it is better.
Thank you, that's great. And can I just ask again about the growing media? I think I'm just wondering, sort of previously, as it was this an issue or not, or is growing media always supplied in a pest-free way?
Previously, it's not been an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a big issue, or going to be an issue.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the company we get our compost from is a big company. I'm sure they'll be able to resolve it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because it's a wider discussion. Because you know, obviously, well, not obviously, but I mean, I work very closely with the biodiversity colleagues as well, and you know, obviously, at the moment, it's all about how great soil is with lots of, you know, with living soil with lots of bugs and animals in it. And on the other hand, you know, obviously, we're trying not to. Well, we can't spread damaging pests through soil or growing media. So, you know, so it's definitely, you know, bringing up something that I think is quite an issue, really.
Yeah, well, I think so. I think we'll see. I'll persecute our suppliers and see what they say.
See what they say. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. No, it'd be good to know. You know, I'll keep in touch with Sarah about anything on this, because you know, there's going to be quite a few people that were thinking about it, because it sort of really came up in my head because another person was talking about how they'd been using the technique of, you know, the other technique is just to wash all the roots. I mean, I don't mean just, you know, washing all the roots. So if people were sending, you know, not sending that many outside Europe, yeah, that was an option. But for the amount of, you know, plants that are getting sent from GP to Europe, in your case, Ireland, I mean, that doesn't seem, you know, that's not an option, is it?
Well, no, because our plants are, you know, the containerized plants, and they're grown in compost, so we can't.
Yeah, you would. It wouldn't work, would it?
Plus the compost.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
All different.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
No, thanks for raising it, Gary, and thank you, Neil, for your input. Thanks again, Kevin. Kevin mentioned GDPR. We do have a specialist as part of the Tyfu Cymru project who's an ex-solicitor. So if anybody wants business advice specifically on GDPR, contact us. And as always, please do get in touch if there's anything else that we can help with. When you leave the webinar, there'll be a short evaluation form. If you could fill that in, it just takes a couple of minutes, we'd be really grateful. So thanks for attending. Great to see people, and hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Bye.